Alright, last section of the chapter 4.6 is formalizing relations and functions. Key thing here is that this lesson has a few skills and ideas you'll need to learn. The information may not seem to connect, but it does wrap up our unit. Again, I'm not the biggest fan of chapter 4, but I do understand that chapter 4 does have some things that you'll definitely be using pretty soon. For example, once we get to chapter 5, you'll be using a lot of the stuff that we learned, or not a lot, but a good amount of the key stuff we learned from chapter 4 there. First off, domain, you want to kind of write at least a general idea for these, but the domain is the x values of a relation. The range is your y values of the relation. The easiest way for me to remember that is that d goes before r, just like x goes before y. But you do need to remember that domain is x and range is y. That is part of your test. That's part of everything that you need to know. And a relation is a function if each input only has one output. So again, that's another definition that's not really going to come into play much, but again, because we're in a remote setting, I really can't test that. But again, the key idea is that a function is pretty much each input only has one output. So a calculator is like a function. And what happens is, if I type in 2 plus 2, which is your input, I should only be able to get one answer, which is 4. If I type in 3 plus 1 as my input, I should only be able to get one output, which is 4. Now notice I have a duplicate on the answer of 4, just like if I do 5 minus 1, I still get 4. So in order for it to be a function, you can repeat your output, you cannot repeat your input. Because if this calculator worked to where sometimes 2 plus 2 is 4 and sometimes it was 5, that's an issue. But what should happen is you should know exactly what you're going to get whenever you plug something in. So let's just look at some processes that we need to understand, because pretty much, again, this is a specialized chapter, and so we need to make sure we know what's going on. So if they want to know f of negative 3 for the function f of x equals x squared plus 3, what we're going to do is look at this and say, alright, negative 3, pretty much f of x means turn that x into negative 3, and so all we're going to do is put f of negative 3 is negative 3 squared plus 3. Negative 3 squared means negative 3 times negative 3, which is positive 9, and you end up with the answer of 12. So again, that's one process you're going to see as you kind of work through that. Again, that is function notation. Whenever you see function notation, it means take that number and substitute it for x and solve. You don't even do anything with the other side. All you are doing is looking at the first part. Identify the domain and range of the relation. So here what we're going to do is we're going to say our domain is, and we're going to list it and put a brace is what you call that. And you want to look at your domain, which is all of your x values, in order. And again, it has to be in order. The smallest one is negative 2, then 1, then 4, then 5, and close your brace. Your range is all of your y values. Remember, range is y. Again, in order. Your lowest is negative 4, but we have two negative 3s. There's no need to list negative 3 twice. They just want to know what values are in there. So don't list any repeats, but that's it. So again, your key idea is no repeats. And so that would be your two answers for domain and range. Again, these are all test questions, so make sure that you are paying attention to them because you are proving that you at least know how to do this stuff. Find the range for the given domain. In other words, we are giving you the x values. What are the y values? So what you do is you take the x values, 2 parentheses negative 2 plus 1, and work that out. Then you take your negative 1, again to this equation here. Then you take your 3, I'm sorry, that's a 1. So it should be 7. I was working ahead of myself. Anyway, those were my input values, which was my domain. These are my outputs, which are my range. So my range should just be the values that I got, which is negative 3, negative 1, and 7. And that's it. So again, if I gave you the input values, tell me what the output values are, and that's all that wanted you to do. Alright? Another topic that must be learned is the concept of a reasonable domain and a reasonable range. A reasonable domain and range represents the realistic values that can be used for a function. Remember, whenever we made tables for a word problem, or remember when we made tables for a word problem, the profit earned from selling. Let me try that again. A reasonable domain or reasonable range represents realistic values that can be used for a function. I don't think that we did the tables for the word problem, but what I discussed in that was that you could not. I briefly discussed that you could not have -1 cells or -2 cells. It had to start at 0 and kind of work its way up. But again, the profit earned from selling fruit at a stand can be modeled by the function p of x equals 13x minus 10. In this function, x represents the number of pieces of fruit sold. Again, it does not make sense to sell -5 pieces of fruit. It actually doesn't make sense to sell any negative values, but you can sell 0 pieces of fruit. And so, therefore, 0 is a reasonable low value. But at the same time, it doesn't make sense that you could sell 1,000,000 pieces of fruit, because that's really a lot of fruit for you to sell at your stand for that day. So, again, reasonable means I think 0 as a low point would be reasonable. Again, no negatives, but there has to be a high number that actually makes sense for the situation. So that's what we're going to be looking at, is what makes sense for each situation. All right. So a reasonable domain is a set of values that can be expected in a situation. A reasonable range is a set of results. All right. So domain, as I was talking about, is values that can make sense. The range is the results that make sense. So you must know the reasonable domain before you can calculate the reasonable range. So consider this as we get ready to close our lesson. There's actually one more thing I have to cover. You're selling candidates at a park. You'll earn 67 cents on each candidate sold. You have ordered enough supplies for 250 candidates. The function blah represents the profit P you earn for each candidate sold. Find a reasonable domain and a reasonable range. So what you're looking at is the low amount that you can sell is 0. Again, it does not make sense that you could sell negative candidates for this. The high range is already in your information because it says I ordered enough for 250 of them, which means my reasonable domain, again, the format is important, is 0 is less than or equal to C, which is less than or equal to 250, because the value of items that I sell has to be between 0 and 250 included, because you can sell 0, you can sell 250. Now here's where things get interesting. Your range is what comes out. So what you do is you take your reasonable number here and plug it in. 0.67 times 0, if you sell 0 items, how much did you make? Obviously 0. And that will be less than P of C, because that's what's over here. And I don't know what the high amount is, but I do know that if I take this and plug it in, I can figure it out. So 0.67 times 250 is 167.5. And so your range means I should make between $0 and $167.50. So I should be able to sell between 0 and 250 items. I should be able to make between 0 and $167.50 to do that. All right. Last thing we're going to talk about real fast is the vertical line test. You want to write this for yourself. The vertical line test pretty much checks to see if something is a function. So I am going to draw some figures here and help you figure out what it is. If your figure looks like this and you do a vertical line test, notice that there's nowhere here where the line crosses twice. So that is a function. That passes. If you did it here, the fact that it crosses twice means that it fails, so no, it would not be a function, and that's what you are looking at. So for the vertical line test, if they give you a picture and say, is it a function? If you can't find any vertical line that crosses more than once, then yes, it is a function. If you find any line that crosses more than once, then no, it's not a function. So let's take this shape here, for example, and look at it. Is there any vertical line I can draw that crosses more than once? No, so therefore this would be a function. But if we were to take that same shape and do this with it, once we can find one line that crosses more than once, that answer is no. So again, that is the last part that is on your work there. Again, just be sure to ask about it if you have any issues with that, because the key idea there is making sure you understand. That is also test information. So the key thought is to study, study, study. It's less important you finish the homework than it is that you can recall necessary strategy. Glance through your Math Excel homework. Be sure you immediately know the strategy. If not, you need to spend more time with it so you do not fall short on any assessments This advice holds for most math classes, so learn to use it in your preparation. Again, hopefully you have a 90% on all your homework after today. Hopefully you can go to your pre-test and actually start working on looking what's on the test. If not, go back and try to get your other scores up. You have until Friday. Your pre-test closes on Friday. Your test is due on Monday, so keep that in mind. But here's the notes. Make sure you answer the question at the end of the video so you can get your credit for watching it. And that's it. Good luck.